Hey, so welcome everybody. I hope you had a good weekend.
Hello.
Just testing my microphone. Can everybody hear me?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right, so I can't hear you. You can hear me, but I can't hear you. So let's see if we can figure out why that is. Okay, I think I should be able to hear you now. There we go. Okay. Problem solved. Any questions on the material from last week before we get going?
I believe the silence is a resounding no.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So today, what I want to do is get started with working with databases. So we're kind of going to be going on a little bit of a different track this week in terms of not being in VS Code as much for the next few days. But don't worry, we'll be coming back to that pretty soon. Because there's a few things we need to kind of set up in terms of, working with the database and seeing, what are the theory parts that go together to make that happen.
Are we going to start off with Mongo or MySQL?
MySQL. We're starting MySQL, and then in a few weeks we'll hit Mongo.
Oh.
Okay. So what you want to do, you want to kind of get your software installed first. I'm going to go out to mysql.com. Okay, so you want to pull this up in your browser. And then under downloads, there's a few different ways you can get this. MySQL's available for free, but there's also like a paid version. So you're going to make sure that we get the trial version, or the free version, which is the community version down here. MySQL community downloads. And then I think we want this one, MySQL installer for Windows. So you want to pull that down first. It looks like there is only a 32-bit version, so that's the one I want. What is the difference between these two? These seem to be web community. Oh, okay. So this is the larger, right. Okay, so I'm going to pull this one here that's 24.5. Hit that, go download. I don't need to sign up for an account, so I'm going to say no thanks and just download it.
Now, with the bigger one, is that one with just more community like repos in it, or what would be in that one?
So the difference being is you just pull down a small download and then it's all downloaded through the client, or you're downloading most of the stuff through your browser and then installing it. So
okay.
It's the difference is just, do you want to use their client to download the files, or would you use your browser to do it?
Okay.
So the only thing it really can affect is how long it takes to install. If I were, say, putting it on a flash drive and taking a computer that doesn't have internet access, I would pick the second one. But if you're using it on a computer that does have internet access, then just doing this is fine. Now, it's complaining a little bit to me, saying that it's running because I already have it installed. So I'm going to say do not automatically close the applications and restart them after setup. Okay, So you'll definitely want to go through that install right now to get your stuff set up so that we can, kind of together play around with it once it's installed. Now, mine says upgrade. Again, this is because I have some things installed already. You're probably not going to see this message about upgrading it. But for the most part, I think you can just go through. I think you can default that through. Apply update.
You would call the smaller version, right?
I pulled the smaller version, correct.
And we just do a developer default, right, for the setup type?
Setup type. Send me a screenshot about what you're seeing.
Okay.
I forget that this shows up different between having downloaded it already and not having downloaded it already.
Is this just having MySQL Workbench? Is this where you're... I think I already have this.
I don't think this. Well, this is the main SQL. This is the SQL server, right? So you've got kind of two pieces. So the first part we're installing here is the server, which is going to kind of run or host our database. Okay, let me see. Yeah. So what you're seeing, Troy, is there's a bunch of different options about what you want to install, and so yeah, I would go with the developer default as the one you select. If you're saying server only, then you're saying I only want the server that hosts the database, but I don't want any sort of tool to connect to it. Client only says I only want to connect to the database, I don't want to host the database, things like that. But I believe that the developer default has both of those two things. Now, I think that Workbench is actually a separate install, if I'm not mistaken. Once we do this.
It's upgrading right now. It's the second one.
Well, it's upgrading because I already have it installed.
Oh yeah. I don't know. I have the same thing. That's why I was curious because
Right.
I've already installed MySQL before, so I didn't know.
Yeah. I should have probably uninstalled this before I started that process, but live and learn. So I may have to go back and uninstall this so I can get all the right screenshots. Check for requirements. Following up. Pick the second. I would pick the second one, Troy, where it says. Yeah, I'd pick that second one, I think, where it says it's based on Office tools rather than the one that's based on Visual Studio tools. Zach, your mic's on.
Oh,
Okay.
What setup type are we choosing? Developer default or full?
Yeah, developer default would be the one that you want.
there we go.
You're recording this, right?
Yeah, I am.
Okay. Because every time I try to follow along, I have to like switch screens, and then I get lost and I miss something, and I'm just like.
I hear you. But yeah, I am recording this session.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Because I had to use the restroom and I missed.
So this is not a small install either way, but basically we'll need to get this installed first so that we can, have everybody on the same page.
You said to install the version for Microsoft Office, but I only have the version available for Visual Studio.
Then try that one. It doesn't matter too much, I don't believe.
Well, the check requirements, it's saying that you don't have like an up-to-date thing, I don't think, because I clicked on Microsoft and it says you don't have Microsoft Excel or whatever.
Okay. So for the Excel thing, what you'll want to do is go out to Office 365. And use your school login to get in. If you use your school login to get in, then you can download Excel and such from there. I don't think that's either of those are a hard and fast requirement. I think that's basically just it needs those to install like the plugin for Visual Studio or a plugin for Excel.
So for me, it says I already have Excel, but I'm still failing the requirement. I don't understand.
Can you send me a screenshot of whatever the error is that you're seeing?
Yeah.
Yeah. So once all that finishes downloading, you're probably going to see something similar to this. You see I've got product configuration, and it's telling me it's ready to configure.
Do you just want me to click next? Because I sent you the picture, but it's the same thing that Troy posted.
If you're going to send me a picture, please send it in the Discord so that in the Discord channel so everybody can see it.
All right.
That way I don't have to jump back and forth between private messages for that too. Following products. Okay, so let's see. Following products have failed requirements. MySQL will attempt to resolve them automatically. Correct. Yeah, so for those you should be able to just hit next.
Okay.
Yours is also saying that you need Python, but we're not actually going to do anything with Python.
I don't know why it says Python. I've never never touched it.
Yeah, I think I'm going to guess that developer default it looks like it includes a connector for Python. But yeah, no, that's fine. You can just hit next if that's what you're seeing here.
And then we just hit execute to finish the download.
Yeah. I think that what I mean by manual here is if you wanted to install that part, you would have to go install the other thing first and then come back and fix it. So it looks like in order to install the MySQL thing for Excel, you need both a version of Excel installed and the Visual Studio tools for Office. But neither of those, I don't think any of those are a blocker.
Since we're talking about theory here, we got a little bit of a moment. What's with the dolphin? Is that like is it kind of like the analogy for maybe like going to fetch something and bringing it up and serving it up, like there'd be a ball on the dolphin's nose or something?
Probably. I don't know. I've actually never asked that question. I just know that that's their logo. And that has been their kind of their logo has been a dolphin for for many years. So I don't know how that came about. So
Mr. Smith, are we supposed to put this in program files?
yeah, take whatever the default install location is, keep that. I would not recommend changing the install location.
Mine went to my download folder. Maybe I did the wrong one.
Okay. Well, it will go to your download folder first, and then you need to run the installer.
Oh, I see.
Right? It will go to your download folder, and then you need to run it from your download folder.
Are some of these products not going to work, like Workbench and stuff? Like, are we expecting some of these to not download?
Workbench will probably... I'm assuming that you're going to have to download Workbench separately, so I'll do that in a minute once we get everybody set up on the server.
For me, I've got quite a few errors.
Okay. Again, can you give me a screenshot of whatever you run into?
Yeah.
I had to manually resolve all of the failing requirements to get it to work right.
Okay. So then,
mine's still installing, but at least I don't have a big list of failures like I had before.
Okay. Then what you might want to do... Okay, so it tried to install Workbench, but it had an error. If you go to show details, that will... Because right now it's just telling you what failed. If you go to show details, it'll tell you some info about why it failed. So, like, one of those I'd be interested in is why did your MySQL shell fail? Because that shouldn't have any dependencies, as far as I'm aware.
It says failed, or hold on, let me try and find it. Yeah, MySQL shell failed with message bad download temp file removed.
Okay, so you just need to try it again because your connection was bad. It just failed. It says it failed the hash check.
Alright, now I'm down to 2 errors.
Okay. What are the 2 that are remaining? And
It says ODBC and J.
Yeah, that's okay. We don't need ODBC or J. I think of those connectors that are listed there, yeah, if I remember right, ODBC would be for, I think that's actually for Java, which then begs the question, what's J? Because I would think that's JavaScript as well. I mean, Java, not JavaScript. But is there some more error about either of those, the ODP one or the J one?
It's still downloading, so give me a second.
Okay.
Yeah, my install's finished. If you manually resolve all the failing requirements, then everything just installs properly.
Okay. Does anybody else run into issues, or where are you at?
Mine worked just fine, so I don't
I'm
know.
currently on the connect to server area, and it says that my server's running, but then it says connection failed.
Okay. Are you... So you've gone past the install part here. You're on the configuration part.
Yes, my Discord doesn't work if it's in the installer for some reason. Yes, I'm on that part.
Okay. Okay.
Would it be easier to wait, or?
It would be easier to wait till
All right, I'll do
everybody's
that
on the same page there. I just want to make sure everybody's got the install this part done, because obviously files being big, download speeds being different, and other requirements that are, I guess, are in play. That looks like it's going to take a bit for everybody to get here.
Alrighty.
So.
I believe I'm right past that page that you're on there.
Mm-hmm.
There's no go back button, but I'm at the type networking, and it's showing TCP IP and a port, X protocol port. Is that coming up next?
Let me see.
But I can show you my screen here.
Yeah,
do a shot.
I'm going to go through these two steps because this step looks like it's different because of my update. Product configuration. Next. Okay, so I have that. I may actually just need to... I wish it was easier to get back to a clean install of MySQL. It's like I had to do a little bit install over the summer to get things set up. Zach, can you send me a screenshot? Zach and Paul, can you send me a screenshot of what screen you're seeing, and I'll see if I can get back to there.
Yeah.
Sure.
I don't know why mine's being slow. It's been stuck at 50% for a minute.
Yeah, I'm not surprised.
One of them does take pretty long.
Mr. Smith, I was in the bathroom at the time when we were going through installing all of this stuff. What am I supposed to do about the which setup type should I use?
Go through the developer default setting.
Paul, your hot mic.
Hey Paul, your mic's locked on. Stuck on.
There.
I'm not sure how that happened. Maybe the keyboard got
If you
stuck.
stay in the installer, the SQL installer, and you have the push to talk open, when you click on it, it'll leave your hot mic open.
Yeah, what a bug.
You said rookie mistake to me, and then you turn around and do it right back.
I'm a rookie though.
Okay. Yeah, there's where we want. Okay. So you should have seen something like this first. Standalone MySQL server versus Innodb cluster. Innodb cluster.
Never had that screen.
Okay. You might have it later on in the process. It may or may not be the first screen you see. I believe we just want to go with the standalone version. The cluster version is more of a kind of cloud computing setup. So this is going to be lighter weight. So
all right, I'm done.
Setting like this.
I'm done with the installs. You just want us to wait at product config, or are we just going through it?
You should get to this.
Okay.
You should get to this screen because it sounds like everybody's. It sounds like the screen where we'll kind of meet up. So.
And you did standalone?
Yes, standalone MySQL server. Yeah.
All right, now I'm all caught up.
Yeah. So we'll look at this. Yeah. Snip this. So if you would thumbs up that screenshot when you get here. And if you're having any trouble, please let me know and we can try to troubleshoot that right now.
I was at that window and I accidentally clicked beyond it. Now I can't get back to it. And I'm in the workbench now.
Okay. That's why I wanted you to wait here and not go beyond it.
Oops. All right.
Okay.
Can I configure it in Workbench?
So if you go back, you need to close Workbench. If you go back into the menu, you're going to be under the M's. You'll find a folder named MySQL. You'll click on this MySQL installer community. That's what you want to run.
Sorry guys, I have like one more install to go through, and it's like kind of stuck at 50% right now, so I'm just waiting.
Well, most people haven't thumbs up my comment, so as far as I know, most people aren't here yet. So I'm still gonna hang out here, but yeah, this is where you want to be. Is start that installer, Paul. Do you got that?
Yeah, I'm back. That was easy.
Okay. Yeah. Just fair forewarning, some of the things that you need to set up in here, for instance, like setting the port and setting the admin account, the root account, are not necessarily easy things to come back in and fix later if you skip through those steps. Not that it's impossible, but those are things you want to pay attention to.
So I think I'm where Paul was on that, where I actually restarted it. The Bootstrap Router for use with an Innodb cluster. It says host name and password right there. We already passed that part.
No, you should be specifically at this screen. If you're not at the screen, please come back to the screen.
Alrighty.
Here I had pit standalone. If that's the one screen that was before that. Sheridan, how are you coming along? So is everybody actually here? Because it sounds like not everybody's here.
I'm here. Just waiting.
Let's see. So I've got 8 people on my list. So who does that leave? Ben, how are you coming along? Where are you at?
My bad, my mic was muted. I'm still waiting on it to install. It's just taking a while.
Okay, good. Just checking in. I just want to make sure that nobody's like stuck. Okay.
I should be on the same page as everybody else.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah. I count 12 people in chat, but only 8 people have thumbs it up. So I think that means there's still 4 people that are still in the process of installing. So
I'm at the point where like I'm gonna have to rewatch this all to get to the point. So
can you at least try, Sheridan?
Yeah.
It's just because this install is a lot easier to troubleshoot from a kind of a live perspective rather than necessarily a recorded perspective. Because the way your machine is set up is not going to necessarily be the same way as everybody else's.
Yeah.
Mo, where are you at in the install process? Mo, are you here? Are you present?
Is there any way for me to just delete all those files and completely restart over?
Yeah, there is. I had to do it. If you reopen the installer after closing it, it should give you, instead of an install, it should give you an option to change or remove. So just go to remove and select everything, and that should put you back at the start.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Welcome back, Daniel. Where are you at in the install process? So Zach, you were saying to uninstall and restart?
Yeah, I'm actually removing some of the things right now, and then I'm gonna reinstall it and get to the screen where you're at now, so I can be at your pace.
Okay. Okay. I don't think you probably will need to, but okay. Okay. So Daniel, since you had to restart, you'll want to go into, like I was telling with everybody else, you'll want to go back to, in here you'll find a folder named MySQL, and you'll go back into MySQL installer community. And that will get you back to where I'm at. All right. So let's go on to the next thing. Okay, so assuming you're on the screen, you're going to see a few different options here. I'm going to go look at kind of what's in the dropdown. I would recommend just stay on developer computer. You don't need to pick any of these other options, but you can kind of see what's available there. So we're going to have our config type as developer's computer. That's going to be best for us kind of locally testing. If we were to need to install SQL Server on an actual like server to need to deploy it for a live website, a real website, that's where you might have these other options. So they're configured or optimized differently for how your server is set up. So server computer in here, as you're seeing, if you're running your server, but it's maybe not the only thing that's running on the server. So maybe you have your web application, your Node.js application is hosted on the same server, or you've got an ASP.NET application or something else. If you have something else hosted on that website, it's not alone, then that's where you're going to do a server computer setup. Versus dedicated community is like, hey, there's nothing else running there. This is the only MySQL instance that's happening. So that's if you need more horsepower and you need it to be kind of standing on its own. So that's what's available there, but for our purposes, we just need to pick developer computer. Underneath that, there's a few, what we say, connectivity options, and that will give you different ways of connecting to your database. So typically, we're going to connect to our database with a network connection, which goes over TCP/IP. Similarly, how we connect to our web servers, our Node.js web servers, they also go over TCP/IP, right? So that's the main way that we're gonna connect it, which means that we need to make sure that that's open, that's checked. Okay. You may know a little bit if you've kind of played around with firewalls and you know how a little bit how Windows works. Windows has something built in called a firewall, and it blocks, by default, it generally blocks ports to say you can't open network connections to other programs, whether it be outside of your computer or within your computer. So by us opening these firewall ports, that says not only can our programs connect to this port, that also says that other computers can connect to this port. With me?
Yep.
So that can be a little bit of a security kind of concern, potentially. Do be aware of that. The fact that we are checking this out does mean that you're exposing that port to other computers potentially on the network to connect to your SQL Server. So do be aware that is a potential concern there. And if you're really, really concerned about security, you may want to look at, doing that a little bit differently. But from development perspective, this is just kind of the easiest way to get up and running. That does mean also, one of the things that this means from a security standpoint is because anybody can connect to your computer, you don't want to use the default username and password. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Because this server is going to be open to anyone on the network, you don't want to be using the default username and password. So you can change the port. The port's by default 336. Obviously, that's the default, so everybody kind of knows that. That's public knowledge. So if the benefit of not putting the of leaving it as 3306 means that typically when you set up your connection in Node or whatever other technology you're using, that means that you don't usually have to specify the port. You can usually use the default port. You can usually let it default to the port. However, if you change it to anything else, let's say I set this to port 4000, I would then need to put that port 4000 somewhere in my configuration for my web application. Does that make sense?
So do we change it or leave it?
I would leave it. But that's the thing to be aware of. Your actual setup when you go to use this may not be port 3306. Does that make sense?
Okay.
I would test it this. I would have it set up this way, but you can do that. Kind of one thing you might think there as well. Maybe if I don't use 3306, maybe it's a little bit more secure, which to some degree maybe. It means that an attacker can't just straight up go, oh, I'm going to connect to 3306 on your computer, right? And look if MySQL's there.
Yeah.
That being said, there's things called port scanners, which you can just do a brute force and try all the ports and figure out, oh, well, this port's open and it's, it's open to MySQL. So just because you change the port really doesn't add much security. It does slow an attacker down, but it doesn't keep you safe. So the important thing there is still to have a good password to keep other people out.
So in our code, we were using mostly port 3000, would just be 3306 now. That's the main change. That's how it would look.
No, your application's not running on this port. The database is running on this port.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. We'll see it later.
So
thanks.
So you have your web server, our application, which is running on one port, and then we have the database who's running on a different port. So this will be running on 3306. They've also got here you can set up the connection using named pipes or shared memory. Both of those are, in some sense, they're more secure because they're not going over the network. They can also be more efficient because, again, neither of these kind of go over the network. A named pipe is kind of a way in Windows for two applications to pass information between each other, but it doesn't require a network connection. Is the gist of things. So it can be quicker. Shared memory is another way to do that. The problem then with the shared memory can be very quick. The downside with it is again kind of a security concern in that once you're using shared memory, well, now you can access the memory of your database server, and that can be a security problem. So both of those can kind of add some performance and remove the network connectivity. But there's also just different networking, different concerns you have to do, and different connections, different ways you have to set up your software to use that. So we're going to leave that at the default, but this is something to definitely be aware of, that there are other ways to set up the connection, and that may have an effect when you try to go do this with a real application. Okay. We have then a few different ways to do our password encryption. I'm going to have this on the strong password encryption because, as I kind of mentioned previously, because you're opening this database to the network, I want to have as strong a password as I can. Okay, so we're going to use that strong authentication. Then we go down to accounts and roles. And I think for me, it says enter the password for the root account. And it's asking me for the current password. I believe it should be asking you for a new password.
Yeah.
Okay. So what you want to do is you'll want to pick something that is, unique to you. Not having the same password as anybody else, something that other people can't guess, because again, this is going to be open to the network. But make sure you write that down because you will need that root password to do stuff, to do the other thing, to do some other stuff with this. Which I don't know if I wrote mine down or not. And I may have to go retrieve that. Let's see if I can go track down what my password is.
Is this going to be a password that you might need to know at some point, or just for us?
It's one that I won't need to know because it's just the password to your machine. So I really don't need to know it. It's just going to be something you're going to use locally. And this is a good place for, remember we kind of started talking about environment variables the other week?
Yeah.
So this is going to be, this password that you have is likely something good that you may need to add to an environment variable. You know, it's going to, so your applications can get access to it. I wouldn't probably add this password anywhere in your code whatsoever. I wouldn't even add this password in a .env file. That would be not secure enough.
Okay, Mr. Smith, a couple things. My screen's different. Got a place to put in the root and then repeat the password.
Right.
And I have.
So,
okay.
Right. So
And
you should have that, and that's going to ask you to type, pick a password and then put it in a second time.
Yeah. Do we have to do something at the bottom with MySQL user accounts? Because I'm not allowed to continue.
Well, you have to. Have you filled in the password yet?
Yeah.
Okay. Can you send me a screenshot to show me what you're seeing?
Sure.
Oh, there it is. There's my password. Okay, I randomly generated one. That's why. I'm like, what password did I use? There we go.
It works. Yeah. Never mind. Must have been typed wrong or something.
Okay. All right, so let's say in here, we're under, once we set up our account or password there, we're going to say the Windows service. So services in Windows are applications that are allowed to run in the background, and typically they're things that are started when your computer starts. Okay.
Real quick, Mr. Smith, going back to the other one, so we just click add user, and does that take a password and add the user, or does that... do we have to do extra stuff with that?
You should be able to just click add user. Again, shoot me a screenshot if you, because I'm not seeing the same screen that you are, unfortunately.
Yeah, when I click it, it's like username, host, role, passwords, all this stuff.
Okay. The username should probably be admin or root. It may have pre-selected, like here it says root account password. So it should be either root or admin as your username.
I didn't set up a user account. It let me go past it without doing that. Just set the root password.
That's fine. That's fine. If you
So
just have a root password.
You don't want us to create a user?
You don't need to create a user at this point. We can do that in Workbench.
Alright, so as long as we've got the root password.
As long as you got the root password, you're good. Yeah. So, any other questions on the account setup there, the root password?
No, not at the moment for me.
Not at the moment for me.
Okay. So we'll go on to this next step, which is to set up the Windows service. So in Windows, you can have applications, which are things that you initiate and run because you tell it to start. But a service is something that's running in the background, doesn't have a UI, and typically is something that starts when your computer starts. So it can kind of influence your startup time somewhat, but it's things you have to make sure that you're running. So this happens with nearly every database system that you have. You need to have some sort of way for the database to be running anytime Windows is running, because the actual database component of it doesn't have any sort of UI, and you want it running all the time. So that's what we're setting up here. If we don't set this up properly, then you would have to start the database every time your computer starts, every time you want to use it. So this makes sure that it's running when we start the computer. So we're going to check the box, say configure MySQL Server as MySQL Server as a Windows service. It gives you a space for the Windows service name. Now, I think that, yeah, so the 80 is coming from 8.0. That's how they're naming it. So this is MySQL 80. the name isn't really all that important, although I would stress that you probably want to keep MySQL in the name so it's easier to find later in case you need to double check that it's actually running. So that would be my one advice with the service name is make sure it at least has MySQL in it, just so it's easier to find. So there's a checkbox here to say, do you want to start it when the system starts up, or do you not want to start it when the system starts up? If you turn that off, well, then your computer's going to boot faster, but you'll have to remember to turn it on and start it every time you need to use it. Versus if you have it checked on, it'll automatically start. Okay. There's also beneath here we have options for what user account is going to run this server, because anytime you have a service running, that needs to be somehow authenticated on your Windows computer. It needs to have some sort of login. So standard system account, that's going to be good enough for us. That kind of runs as Windows, as this quote-unquote system account. If you needed to set up another account for maybe better security, if you wanted to have it run as a particular login with particular login credentials, that's where we would go custom user and actually set up a user in Windows for it to be running as. So there are cases sometimes where you do need to get into that, especially when you're working with things like ASP.NET's a little bit more picky about this, running under a custom user, especially if you have other things it needs to have access to. But standard system account was going to work for us for what we're doing this semester. Okay. So I'm going to go next, and then I'm going to hit execute. So when you get done with that, it should bring you back here. But we want to go into your start menu, look for MySQL, and you should see that you have this MySQL Workbench in your start menu. So if you have that, go ahead and start it up.
It's asking to do the router configuration.
The router configuration. Can you shoot me a screenshot of it? It's probably something you can just click through.
Yeah, for me it took me back to product configuration.
Same here, Mr. Smith is asking me for the product and router configuration.
Can you shoot me a screenshot of it? I'm going to guess that you can probably just click through it because we're not doing anything with it. Oh, so you can kind of see the message in there. It says Bootstrap MySQL Router for use with Innodb cluster. We don't want to set up as an Innodb cluster, so we don't need that.
All right, that's not the one I have, so give me a sec to show you what I have.
Yeah, we don't want to be a Innodb cluster. That's a completely different setup. When you're doing an MODB cluster, you're doing a minimum of 3 servers kind of grouped together, kind of working as one.
It's asking me that, so should I just cancel whatever it's asking me?
You
Or
see there's a checkbox up at the top?
Yeah.
Don't check that box.
I didn't check it at all, so should I just
hit finish.
Press finish and keep going, or just
Yeah,
cancel?
just hit finish and keep going. So, yeah, so you can go through the router config, but you're basically going to tell it not to install it. So
I have like a whole situation.
Yes.
So I was going through the process, and mine like broke, and I had to close it. And it brought me to a whole nother window than when you started up yours.
Got it.
Like, I have no idea where to go.
Okay. Are you able to share your screen? See where you're at.
Yeah.
Just click through my product configuration.
Okay.
Can I do that? Is that safe?
That if that's the only thing you're seeing, yeah, you should be fine. Because the next, if you hit next, it's going to take you to that router screen.
Yeah, it did. Yeah.
So.
It also wants to set up samples and examples.
You can go ahead and let it do that. Just click through that and use the default settings. That gives you a few example databases that you can play around with.
It's asking me to connect to the server.
Yeah,
with my
same here.
password and everything.
Okay. So you'll need to use your password that we just set up as your root password. So your username there should be root, and then the root password that you just set up. So you can hit check on that to verify it. All right, Sheridan, let's see what you have. Okay. Oh, I clicked away. Okay. You need to go to your downloads and close this and go to your downloads and run the installer again. Because it didn't get far enough along. Okay. Click modify. Okay. Modify project. Hit cancel. Hit add. That's what we want. Hit add. So under MySQL servers, yeah, expand that. You're going to pick server 8.0. And I believe the version we have here is 8.0.21. So it's that latest version. Yeah, so you bring that over, hit the right arrow. Okay. Hold up, go back. Under applications, you're going to expand applications. Workbench, you're going to see Workbench there. Expand that. Pick the latest version of Workbench. Okay, and go back. Okay, notifier, we want to make sure notifier is installed. Okay, which looks like it's already taking care of that. The MySQL shell. Okay, and grab the latest version of the shell. I think that's all you need.
Alright, for mine, it took me to app apply configuration. Do I just check through that as well?
Should be. Yeah, it's because I think it's just at that point it's just asking you to say yes. This is what I want.
I don't know what happened last time, but like it just failed everything, and I was just like, okay.
What's running now? Like, because I'm going through it and it says installation complete. I can start Workbench and Shell after setup.
Yeah, so then just Workbench.
Not Shell? Okay.
Yeah, we just need to get into the Workbench. So the short explanation, so the server of some of these components, the server is the part that's actually running or hosting the database. your Workbench is the main tool that we're going to use to actually interface and work with the database directly, to do things, before we have our application hooked up to it. So we'll use that as our main UI to get into the database. The shell lets you run some commands over, a terminal instead of running it through the UI. So primarily we're gonna do this stuff through the through Workbench, but you can actually access the shell through the terminal window in VS Code if you were to need to.
I have a question that I kind of just thought about. I installed this on my desktop, but if I follow the same procedure on my laptop, will I still have access to any database I make?
No, you'll have a completely separate database on both. On your desktop and your laptop will be completely separate. So you'll need to do the install on both. If you're going to use both your desktop and your laptop, you will definitely need to do the install on both.
But in terms of like accessing the database from one or another, how big of a problem will that be?
It will be something you don't want to do. I'm going to put it that way. It's something you don't want to do. It's possible to do it, but I would recommend against it. And part of that is that, well, let's say if you're connecting from your laptop to your desktop, well, your desktop you're not going to have in class. So if you're going that direction, it's not going to work. If you're going from, say, your desktop to your laptop, you may be able to get it to work, but then you'd have to have your laptop on anytime you wanted to work on the website. Okay. So you really need to have a SQL server, a MySQL install on the same machine where you're doing development.
So any project I make has to be on the laptop, and I won't be able to work on it from my desktop without like trouble.
I missed that.
So any projects that we make, it has to be on the laptop.
Yeah.
I won't have access to it without trouble from my desktop.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. It's something you can make work, but there's enough hoops to jump through and enough places where it won't work that I would suggest installing a separate install on both.
Okay.
Okay.
Do you not change anything on type of networking?
Correct. I left everything the same. The only thing I've changed at this point basically has to be to set up a root password.
All right.
So
do we add an account or no?
you just need to set up the password for the root account. That's all. So if you're at this point in Workbench with me, please thumbs up and
Configuration steps are all the same?
correct. Okay. So it sounds like you're pretty close, Sheridan.
It opened a term. Oh, there we go. I'm where you're at.
Okay, good. Awesome. So does everybody see a local instance here for local instance MySQL 80? Does anybody not see that? Okay. You're probably going to see that because it should have set it up by default. If you don't see it, what you're going to do is you're going to click a little plus here and connect to the database. So I'm going to go ahead and just delete. I'm going to go ahead and just go in here real quick. So you can see it says local instance MySQL. So this is the name of that connection. It's connecting over standard TCP. You'll remember that we saw that we had some other options there, like a named pipe. So if we had only installed it with a named pipe connection, we need to go in there and change it. Remember, localhost refers to yourself, so that's the name of the connection. If we needed to connect to another computer, this is where we'd specify the name of the other computer. So if I had another computer on my network, like we were mentioning, the laptop, desktop, this is where you would put in the name of the other computer that you need to connect across. Port number, again, default is 3306. If you had set it up to be something different when you set up the server, that's would be where you would set it. And then the password here, you can it's already, as they say, stored in the vault, and we've got the root username. Okay, so let's go ahead and connect to this. I'm going to click on there, and you should get into a view like this. Now, I already have a script here, so I'm going to go ahead and close that.
So you want us to save our password in the vault?
Yes. Yeah. That'll make it easier to get back in later, because you'll need to get into Workbench a few times to do things. But that's up to you, really. You can either type it in every time, or the vault will remember it for future. So the whole point of Workbench is that it gives us a GUI or graphical user interface to work with our server. So you'll see there's a few different kind of categories here over on the left in the navigator that things we can do. So for instance, under management, you can see there's server status. You can click on that to just see, hey, is your server even up and running? Okay. Now, one of the things that I've seen students get into with database servers, this happens, last semester it happened with SQL Server. Sometimes it may happen here. Sometimes Windows doesn't necessarily start maybe it has an issue starting your services. So you may need to go in there and troubleshoot it. So if you're looking in Windows, if you go in the Start menu and you look for services.msc, and that's worth writing down. Services.msc, because this is a common place to do troubleshooting. This will bring up all of your services that you've got set up, whether they're running or not. So in here, I'm going to look for the service that we just set up for MySQL and just verify that it's running from this point, okay? Which it is. but you can see some of the important info there. So I'm looking for MySQL 80. You can see here the name of the service. You can see that the status is running, right? Status is running. Okay, so you've got a bunch of other services here. For instance, you can see these status, these servers. Well, the status is blank. Well, that means it's not running. Okay, so if you come in here at any point, if you have trouble connecting to your server, whether it be through your application or Workbench, you may want to come back and check that your service is actually running. Okay. You'll notice that it's set to automatic. Automatic here means that it starts when the computer starts. I can right-click this and go into properties and change that. And there's a few different ways to have that set up. So automatic says start it when the computer starts. Manual says it only starts when you manually come in here and start it, or where another program starts it. So you want to make sure that that's set to automatic and that it is running. So that's kind of a common troubleshooting problem that I run into. Is sometimes, hey, the server stops, and you need to get it to run again, and that's where you would go here. You'll also notice that under login as, it's saying network service. Remember how previously in the install I said, well, this should be running, the service should be running as the system. So that's what that means. It's because I picked system, it's running as network service. If I had set it as a custom user, that would be running with that username. And I can change that under login by picking a different account. So for instance, I could go to local system account and pick browse and go pick one of the accounts, one of the users that are on the computer. It would run as them. Okay. Any questions on the services window?
Nope.
Okay. So if you can't connect to your server, just check this window because it's likely to be the case that it's not running. Because some, especially laptops, sometimes I've seen issues where they don't necessarily start all their servers when you turn the computer on. So we can see here kind of an overview of the status. We can see how much memory it's kind of using, how much CPU load it's using. So we can do other things to kind of check up on it there. So that's our overall sort of management stuff. Okay. There's also, so we're in administration here. You can also go over to the schemas tab. Okay. So if I go over to schemas, you're probably going to have these three databases there: Sakila, Sys, and World.
I do, but I don't know if it's just mine, but like the top half of your stream is super blurry.
Okay. I may need to just zoom it in somehow. Actually, if I just change windows, if I go to just Workbench. Oh.
That's better.
Yeah.
Yeah, I may have to restart. I'll be right back.
Okay.
Hello?
Hi.
Is it?
So,
I only have systems.
Ben.
Got it.
now, I walked away for a couple seconds and he was on a completely different window. How am I supposed to get there?
Which one?
There we go.
That window right there, there you go.
Click server status right underneath management.
Yeah.
You're a god, Zach.
Yeah.
I don't know about that. I might get struck down now for you saying that. I got to go to extra charge.
So, Yeah.
Church close.
I switched my streaming to just the window and it crashed. So it should be less blurry now.
Yeah, it's good.
Yes,
You gotta upgrade to that Titan.
but
So
I also don't have the World and Notepad.
okay. Well,
Stinks.
Notepad, you won't have because that's an example database we haven't gotten to yet. System you should have, right? Sys.
Yes.
Okay. So Sys is a very important database. That's one that MySQL needs in order to run. And one of the things that it does, it keeps track of all your other databases that you have. Okay. So one thing to know with Sys, don't touch it.
Yes, sir.
Got it.
Whatever you do, don't touch Sys. Don't create your tables there. Don't create databases under Sys or anything under Sys. You want to leave Sys alone.
I kind of want to touch it now.
Huh?
I kind of want to touch it now.
Okay, but it just if you do, you have a very good chance you may need to completely uninstall MySQL and bring it back in if you're not cautious, because there are important things in there, like the configuration and such. And I guess they don't have the users being stored here. SQL Server has this setup. They have a similar setup here. They call it, I think it's still called like system, but that database also stores things like your user logins, your credentials. So if you lose that, then you can't even log into the database server, and then it's a very sad day. So I believe that World, so World is an example database. That's why your install failed midway, Sheridan. So that's where we'll need to go back and install the example databases.
Okay.
That's why you didn't have that. That won't prevent your server from running, but if you want to do use those example databases, that's where that is. So it's not a blocker that you don't have those installed, but that's how you would get it installed, is the example databases, the sample databases. Same thing with Sequila. Both of these are example databases.
Will I need them?
I don't believe so. I don't believe you'll need Sequila or World. But if you were to want to get them, you just go back and pull down the samples.
Got it.
I don't believe you'll need those. Okay, so now that we've actually got Workbench up and running, the first thing you typically want to do to get started with an actual database is create a new database. Okay, so let's say we want to start building out a database. Okay. I'm going to bring this up here. Okay. So here's our options. Okay. If you would post in Discord, picking one of these options.
We still see your
project ideas. Oh, okay. Let me fix that. Change windows. Sorry. I forgot that I went to window share.
Quick thing. How did you get? Oh, never mind. I see now.
See what?
I was confused on where we were at just because we were looking at a different page.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm just on schemas there. So what we'll want to do to go through this example, I think we already have one. Let's just use that. So we did the cowboy boot store. Right?
Yes.
Let's build that one. Let's build that Cowboys boot store. I'll just do that. That'll be easy. Okay. So let's say I want to create a new database. So I'm going to go up here. I guess I can go back to sharing my just SQL server, just SQL Workbench. Database. Oh, wait a second. Why do I want to just create a new database? I'm forgetting where that button is. There it is. So up here, you're going to see it says create a new schema. Okay. Create a new schema in the server. So with different database technologies, those are, you've got this idea of a database and a schema. Sometimes they mean different things depending on what server you're using. In this case, with MySQL, it's basically a one-to-one. So when we're saying create a new schema, we're basically saying create a new database. There's a slight difference between what those usually mean, but in this case, create new schema means create a new database. So we're going to hit new schema. We're going to need to give it a name. So I'm going to give it Cowboy Boots is the name of our database. And we've got options here for our character set and the collation. Okay. So the character set has to do with like what language is your primary language. Okay. What language are we using to put in our data? Okay. Now we're American, right? Obviously, most of us are writing in English, right? So what would be a good character set to pick here? Well, we've got basically two options. You can go with ASCII, which is going to say, I just want to support English speakers, and that only supports ASCII. We might want to be a little bit more general and say UTF-8, which will actually support other languages, but basically by default behaves mostly as if it's English only. So that's what I would recommend as you're picking your character set. I would recommend picking UTF-8. You can leave it at the default. You can set it as ASCII as long as you're not expecting to have other languages in there. But I would set it up as UTF-8 is probably the better starting point. Collation then has to do with how do you compare your strings by default. So if we're saying UTF-8 bin, short for binary, that says compare all your strings as there are exactly the same. So if I have something lowercase versus uppercase, those don't match, right? But most of the time when I'm doing, let's say I'm doing a search on the database, I usually want that to be case insensitive. So you'll see all of these are suffix. A lot of these are suffixed with the underscore CI. Underscore CI stands for case insensitive. So the collation I'm going to pick is UTF general CI. And that will mean anytime I'm doing string comparisons, they're going to, by default, be case insensitive.
What's the default? That was already selected. Is that going to break it if you just leave it?
I think it's bin. I think it's UTF-8 bin by default, which is basically case sensitive. Okay, so I'm going to set those. I'm going to hit apply. Okay, so now it's going to pop this window out here. And you can see a little bit of code, okay? What we're seeing here is actually SQL, structured query language. So SQL is kind of the most common language that we use to interface with databases. And most databases know how to understand SQL. Pretty much all relational databases talk some version of SQL. Now, they disagree on a few things. So, for instance, in here, you can see that it's got kind of the grave marks around Cowboy Boots, which is the name of our database. So that's one of those things that changes depending on which flavor of SQL that you're using. Can you see this pop out, or do I need to switch to...
Yeah, I can see it.
Okay. I'm like, it's sharing... I'm not sure... Okay, yeah, you can. Okay, I just need to pull it over. So that's what it's running. It's running this command create schema, which is basically saying create database, and it's saying let's create this with, I guess actually UTF-8 general CI must be the one that it's using by default because it went ahead and just said default character set. Although, oh wait, but no, it didn't set that collation at all. Okay, so that must be the default collation. So that's the command there. So it's given us this script that we could potentially, if we needed to run this later, we could kind of save this script, right? And put it in a text file if we needed to recreate this database. I'm going to come back later and kind of put that together. So I'm just going to say hit apply to execute that script. Okay, so it did a quick progress bar. We can hit finish. You should now see that you have a new schema here called Cowboy Boots. Everybody got that?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. So under Cowboy Boots, we want to then start to be able to put tables in there to start storing data. So with our relational database, with our SQL database, everything that we do is stored in tables. They're kind of like tables that you would have in Excel, where you've got rows and columns and cells. So let's create a new table here. I'm going to right click on the tables folder here and say create table. Okay, and it's going to give this sort of dialogue like this. Okay, so if I've got a Cowboy Boot store, right, what am I probably selling? I'm probably selling cowboy boots. I think we had some other items that we're selling beyond just cowboy boots.
Yeah, hats and such.
Hats,
belt buckles, leather, shoes,
right.
Socks.
So when I'm kind of designing the data structure, I can think of this. How I store it, which the database is, I can think of this in a bunch of different ways. So I could say, well, let's say I have a table for boots, I have a table for buckles, I've got a table for hats, right? So I could set that up, but I might run into maybe some issues. So for one, if I say, if I have a table for boots, do boots have the same attributes as hats? First of all.
No.
No.
Not exactly, right? But they're similar in some ways, right?
Yeah.
Like they all have all of those items, right? You know, whether it's a boot or a hat, they're all going to have names. They're all going to have prices, right?
Yeah.
They might have quantity available, right? So there's a lot of things that they're going to have in common, even if there are certain things that they might not share, right? Or they might have some sort of color setting, right? They might not share the same sizes that are available, but in general, they have a lot of core attributes that they share, okay? So when I'm dealing with that, maybe, I mean, you guys did object-oriented programming last year. How would you deal with those differences in setup when you're thinking about objects?
They would be properties, or they would become property values.
Okay.
And so you'd have to make classes for, like, I'm trying to think of how to explain it.
Yeah.
So your class would be like a representation of like one item in your database, and so it would have to match properties and whatnot.
Right. So typically, I think kind of as my classes and my objects is interchangeably with this idea of rows and records in the database. Let me switch my screen here. Change windows. So if I want to kind of model that, I might have, there's some sort of thing here, right? And that thing has properties of like name, price, and quantity available, or quantity in stock. Right. So I could kind of model my object that way. They also probably have some sort of like image. Now, let's say I've got other things in here. So I've got boots. What attributes does a boot have, or boots have?
Style, texture.
Okay.
Size.
Size.
So style, texture, size. Okay. So we've got those. Anything else? I think that looks good. So I've got a boot. Let me say I've got a buckle.
What window are you in right now? How did you open that?
I'm in a separate program. I'm in Oomlet. I'm just doing a quick UML diagram.
Okay. Right.
So this is a different program. We were just going through it because what I want to go through is talking about how you kind of design the database itself. So we've got a buckle, right? So a buckle still is going to have those same basic attributes. What else might it have? You might.
Are we supposed to be following along with you doing this, or are we just supposed to be watching?
You can just watch this part.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah, you can just watch this part. I'll generate a diagram and I'll post this once we're done. You don't need to follow along with this part.
Okay.
So it's got what else? Maybe a design.
Yeah.
Right. So the buckle has a design. And what else? What was the other item? It was a hat. Okay, so hat has maybe, similarly, we might have a style and a size, maybe a color. Everybody with me?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So one way I could design this, I could design the database having 3 different tables. I could have a boot table, a buckle table, and a hat table, right? I could do that. But then the problem is I have to write 3 times as much code because I have to handle all this stuff that's normally, hey, I want to search for a product, right? I want to search for something more general. And then I have to look at each of these different tables to see, okay, well, you were searching for black belt. Is that in hat, buckle, or boot, right? Or if I look for, maybe a brand name, which one is that, right? So usually the way we're going to structure that, we actually create something in the middle, right? Typically I'll call that a product because it's kind of more general. Okay, because you have a product in your store. Now, if I'm setting these up as classes, what would be the sort of relationship I would probably use between these classes?
What's it called? An interface or something?
You're close. What would be the relationship between these classes?
So like class and subclass, are they all supposed to be classes?
Okay, class and subclass would be good. Which one's the parent? Which one's the child?
Product is the parent, and the children are boot, buckle, and hat.
Right. So a buckle is a product, and a boot is a product, right? As well as a hat is a product. So they're all basically subclasses of products, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
So one thing I might want to do up here is maybe I want to move some of these things. Maybe I want to kind of group this here. So let's say maybe I want to have a category so I know which kind of object it is. If I can spell category. So I might add a category in here to at least know which one it is. I could, if I'm writing these in classes, yeah, then I could do that sort of extension. Okay. Now, when I'm trying to map this onto a database, there is no such thing as like class and subclass. Right? There's no such thing as class and subclass. So I can't immediately duplicate this structure. You with me?
Yeah.
So given that I don't have inheritance, I have to kind of use some different techniques to get there, to get this structure. So the way I might do this, rather than trying to have inheritance, rather than trying to have 3 different tables and trying to figure out inheritance, I'm just going to put all this data into one table and call it the product table. So for instance, I know for boots, I need the style, the texture, and the size. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to say everything has that. All products have that. And maybe color. Right? So I'm just going to say...
I don't know if it's like this for everybody, but the focus keeps going in and out rapidly. So it'll be focused and then it won't be focused.
Yeah, it happens to me, but it's like only after you make a change, so it's like when saving or something like that. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know.
It's not that big.
It's tolerable, but if it's fixable, you probably want to adjust it.
I don't know that I have a way around it.
All right, no problem.
The one thing I could do is stop and restart the stream, but I don't. Other than that.
I actually think it might just be changing the resolution of your screen down, and it has to calculate it.
So the way I would go about this is I would say, let's make a product kind of object, right, that just has all those properties. So it's going to have the category, the style, the texture, the size, and the color.
Don't forget design for those buckles.
Right. Okay. Well, here's a question. So is there something that could sub in as design if I just, because the calling it design is not that important. What could I call it instead?
Style.
I'll just call it style, right? So if I just say, oh well, I made a goof there. Let's not call it design. Let's call it style, right? So sometimes sometimes what you have to do is you have to figure out, is that actually kind of a unique thing, right? Or should it really just have a different name to be more general? So if I rename that as style, then I can use that same name for all the different kinds of products. Okay. So what I want to do is I want to end up building a database with this structure. Right, so I'm going to build a table that has those, basically I want to reflect those properties. Okay, so if I go back here, right, the name of the product, we're creating a new table, which I got to from here.
Right. Oh, we still see your inlet page, Mr.
Sorry. Change windows. Actually, let me just stop streaming and switch that way to make sure we're on a new stream. Okay. So you should be looking at the workbench again.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
I threw a screenshot of the diagram that we just did up in Discord, so you can refer back to it. What I want to do is I want to create the table first. So we're in here. I want to name the table by what kind of thing it is, right? So you could think of that as kind of the class name. Some people name this with singular. Some people design their databases and they might call this product, as in a single product. Some people call it plural products. So you'll see both styles when you when you're working with databases. Sometimes people prefer the plural form. Sometimes people prefer the singular form. Which you use is really a matter of taste. I'm going to set mine up with the plural form because I feel like that makes more sense. But some people feel, sometimes the singular makes sense. Sometimes the plural makes more sense, depending on kind of user preference. Okay. So products is the name of our table. I then need to add some columns to it. So you can kind of see if I start clicking in here, this row appears, right? So I can start designing or creating that table, creating those columns, okay? So a column is kind of like a property, right? When we're thinking about objects, right, they have properties. Columns are the same kind of thing. So if I'm looking at my diagram, right, what's probably the first column I should add here? Which, huh?
Name?
The name. Okay. So I'm going to add a column for, oops. I want to add a column for the name. Okay. I need to pick a data type. And if we start looking in the dropdown, you can see there's actually quite a few data types available. Okay. Now, the data types available in SQL are not, they're very similar to what you're familiar with in C#, but there are some differences, right? So there are some numeric types, like there are integers, there are medium ints, there are small ints, there's tiny ints, there's big ints. Those are kind of similar to your longs, your ints, and your shorts. So for instance, if I remember right, big int is 64 bits long. It's like a long. So that's basically a long. An int is 32, so it's your int. And I think small int, either small int or medium int is 16. That would be your short. And then tiny int would be 8, which is your byte. Okay. So you have your kind of numeric types. You also have float, double, and decimal. Okay. So you have these types, and remember that JavaScript only has one numeric type, right? JavaScript only has number. So recognize that when you're going back and forth between JavaScript and SQL, recognize that it's going to have to be converted back and forth between types all the time with your numbers. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Because it's going to have to convert it to basically a double to use it in your program. And then double in your program, which is your number, and then have to come back and convert it to something else. So my name, right, I do have these numbers available, but is my name a number? Probably not, right? So I want something that is more or less like a string, right? I would normally give it the data type string in C#, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so in the SQL world, the data types that exist, there's a few different actual string types that exist, and the reason that there's more than one is because your storage space is a concern. Is you don't want to have a bunch of wasted space for that string. The other thing that matters with databases, for efficiency's sake, every row in your table needs to have the same length in bytes. Okay, so what that means is, in order for everything to have the same length in bytes, which makes it quick to access different rows, your strings basically have an upper limit to their length normally. Does that make sense? Like your strings in C# normally don't have a limit, right?
Yeah.
But the strings in SQL, they're actually more like arrays, where you have to say at the beginning, this is how big they have to be. Okay, so there's a few different types of string or textual data types. The first one is char, or character. Okay, character says I want to reserve space for X number of characters. Okay, and with char, I have to specify how many characters do I want to make space for. So if I say char 100, I'm saying let's make space for 100 characters. But what char says, it says it always has to be exactly 100 characters long. So that means that I have to, if I'm not using any, if I'm only having a name that's 5 characters long, I'm still going to have 95 spaces at the end to fill up that 100 characters. Not terribly efficient, right? So char can be good for certain things like zip codes, right? Zip codes usually have a fixed number of digits. So you could say char 5 for a zip code, or phone numbers usually have a fixed number, right? Similar things like that. But if I need to have something that's a variable length, what I want to do is I want to pick var char. So var char says it can have a variable number of characters. It can have anywhere from 0 to the number I tell it. Does that make sense?
Yep.
So char is fixed length, var char is variable length. So if I'm working with a name, right, not all my names are going to be the same length. So I need to give them an upper limit. I need to use varchar and give them some sort of upper limit. So what would be a good number to use for the maximum length of a product name?
15.
15? Okay, so that's one vote. Any other votes?
I was aiming more like 20, 25.
Okay. So I hear 20, I hear 25, I hear 15. Any other thoughts?
I'm sticking with the 2025 area too.
Okay. Let's cut it in the middle and let's say 20. Okay. So that number is important because it really is your upper limit. It kind of has there's a trade-off there because you're saying I can't have a string that's longer than 20, but I also making that smaller saves more memory and means that your programs run faster if you can get that smaller. So having tighter limits can make your program faster. So we're going to start there. What was the next property on my list? It was image. Okay. Images in databases are always a tricky piece, right? So when I'm talking about an image, what kind of pieces do I need maybe for an image? What kind of data do I need for an image?
I mean, the height and width of the image.
Okay. Will that give me enough to render the image on screen? Just having the width and height of it?
No, we also need the color and the different variables.
Do like the URL.
Okay.
Or the path.
Okay, a path. So I hear width and height. I heard something about pixel, and I hear path.
Maybe a file type.
A file type. Okay. Like what? What kind of file type?
JPEG.
JPEG, right? Or PNG or GIF, right?
Yeah.
So all that together, right? And to really render or be able to display the image, I need to know the actual colors of those pixels, right?
Yeah.
So that's actually quite a bit of data, right? To put all that together, right? If you think about your image, maybe you've got a 1 megabyte image. Well, then that means each row, you have rows in here that are potentially a megabyte in size, right? That's not usually something I want. Okay, so if I wanted to put all of the image, so it's usually something I want, but if I did want to put all the image data in there, the thing I would pick actually would be blob. If I wanted to store the actual image data and have, say, maybe users are uploading it, upload the image, and then they're stored in the database, then I would use what's called a blob. A blob is basically, for all intents and purposes, it's an array of bytes. So that array of bytes doesn't necessarily mean anything. It can be whatever you want it to be. If you think about a file on your system, any file on your system can be represented as an array of bytes or a blob. So a blob can be one way you can solve that problem, right? But that would only necessarily have the image data. That wouldn't have things like, what kind of image is it, right? Or what the width and height of it are. So I might actually have to add more than one column to do that. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So if I'm putting the actual image data in the database, there's actually quite a bit that you have to do to make that work. So the way I'm going to do that instead, and you mentioned the path, is rather than trying to put all the image data into the database, which again you can do, but tends to create more performance problems, what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to put the path, the path or file name into here. And that's where I'm going to just store the path as a string. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So that's, if you do need to add images in there as data elements, what I would do is just, put the file name in there rather than putting anything else. And that way your website can say, okay, put in the HTML or the CSS you want to refer to this, here's the name of the file, and the browser will then go download it from your actual disk. Okay, so we've got the image. What's next? The price. Okay, so is the price a name or a string? Is it a string or a number? It's a number, right? So we talked briefly about there's these different data types for numbers, right? So what data type looks like a good data type for a price?
Float or decimal.
Okay, float, decimal, or double, right? Okay, so any of those are valid and usable, and why would I want to use those over integers?
Because they're floating point numbers.
If you're storing the price as a number of dollars, then the cents will be decimals.
Okay, so if I've got a $5 product, right, could that be stored as an integer? So
if it's just $5,
right? If the price of if it's $5, I could do that, right? I could store it as an integer. But yeah, if it's $4.99, right, then it has decimal points, right? So if I'm storing it as $4.99, I need to store it with something that has decimal points. I could still actually store it as integers, and how could I pull that off? If I want to say $4.99, store it as an integer.
499 cents.
Right. 4.99 cents. So I could do that. I could do that if I wanted to. Right? And one of the upsides of doing it that way as an integer would mean that I don't have any sort of rounding error. Right? Because it's exactly 499 cents, no slush. Okay, so anytime you introduce a floating point number, remember that there's rounding error potentially, right? Because it may not be representing exactly the number that you see. So if I'm looking at float, double, or decimal, what's the difference between those three? Any ideas?
Amounts of precision.
Okay, amounts of precision. Explain that.
Oh.
Huh?
Basically, it's how many digits it holds.
How many digits it holds, sort of. Yeah.
They also have a different amount of space.
Okay. Paul, you're trying to speak up?
Yeah, a float isn't exactly what you write. Like if you put in $1, it's something. It might be 10, 15 decimal places down, but a dollar is not a dollar. It's like 0.999999854, something like that, right?
So with you're kind of on the right track. Dollar is actually a case where you could represent it exactly. Whole amounts, any sort of whole amounts can typically be represented exactly, actually. The things that can't be represented are the cents. So if I put it in as a float, I can't exactly represent 10 cents. There will always be error. Because you can't exactly represent a tenth. And that's because float and double are both in binary. Float and double are both in binary. They're both in base 2, not base 10. So if I'm doing monetary amounts in float or double, I'm going to have error that I then have to deal with later. So what I want to actually use is this thing called decimal. Okay, so decimal doesn't have rounding error. That's why I'm going to use it. Questions?
No.
Okay. Because decimal is base 10. Float and double are base 2. Decimal is base 10. Okay. Now, with decimal, I do need to specify some additional numbers. You saw how with varchar and with you saw with varchar and go back. You saw with varchar I had to specify a number, which is how long it is, right? So with decimal I need to specify, if I remember right, a pair of numbers. Okay, so the first number is how many digits it has. And the second number is how many digits are how many of those digits are after the decimal place, right? So if I'm trying to specify a price for my items in my boot store, what's maybe the most expensive? What's the most expensive I might see in my cowboy boot store?
Oh man, I mean I've seen boots that are upwards of $800.
$800. Okay. All right. So I could pad that a little bit, right? And maybe say, what if it's let's just multiply that by 10 and say 8,000 is our upper limit, right? Because maybe you could see, if you can see 800, you can probably see 1,000, right? So maybe add one more.
They're real. They're out there.
Yeah.
Those fancy diamond plated 24 karat gold boots.
So if we're saying the upper limit for our prices are like, in the thousands of dollars range, right? How many decimal places do we need?
4.
Okay. So 4 where?
In the front.
In the front. Okay. Before the decimal place, right?
Yeah.
Okay. But if I have 4 places before the decimal point, how many decimal places do I have total?
6.
6. So that's the number I actually need to put. I need to put 6 because it's 4 plus 2. So there's 6 decimal places total, and then 2 decimal places after the decimal point. Cool?
Yes.
Is that a comma?
That is a comma. So it's 6 comma 2. Okay. So I need I've got my price and I've put that in as a decimal. Your data types here are typically pretty important when you're building out a database, so it's worth taking some time to think about them. What else? We need the quantity in stock. Now, it's worth noting the SQL language, which is what this is going to turn into, this is going to be SQL statements. The SQL language itself is case insensitive. Okay, the SQL language itself is case insensitive. So when we're naming things, whether we're naming tables or we're naming columns, you want to use underscores to separate the words. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Rather than using camel case here, we actually do want to use underscores because of that kind of restriction that the language is case insensitive. So that will lead us into fewer weird bugs doing it that way. So quantity in stock is what data type?
An integer.
Okay. What kind of integer? Is it just an integer?
The smallest one that would work.
Okay. Well, the question is, what's the smallest one that would work? So let's think about, our upper and lower bounds. What's the lowest quantity that we could have? None, right? So we could have 0. Okay. So we're not too concerned about negative numbers, right?
Yeah.
What about the other side? What's the biggest quantity that you might see?
A few thousand, maybe 10,000.
Okay, 10,000. So if we've got that, what can that be stored in? Can 10,000 be stored in a byte?
No.
Why can't it be stored in a byte?
It's too big of a number.
Okay. What's the upper limit for bytes?
128. Or is it 255? With the signed byte, unsigned byte.
Okay. So for a bit, it's 0, 1, but a byte is 8 bits. So byte is actually got 8 bits. Okay. There's actually 2 answers. You said 128. What's the other answer?
255.
255. So it's actually not 128. It's 127. Because you actually lose one of those bits for the sign, for it being negative or positive. So because of when we're looking at TinyInt is actually can be negative or positive. It's actually 127 to negative 128 is the range of that. Because there's effectively kind of 7 bits that you can use. So I need something bigger than that. As it turns out, I think small int goes up to 16, and that would give 16 bits, I believe, and then that gives us up to about 30K ish, give or take.
2 to the 15th power minus 1.
2 to the 15th power minus 1, which is about
32K.
Yeah. So a small int is probably big enough. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. I don't have to put anything in parentheses for ints because they don't require a number, like the other ones do. So value is kept instead. Why does it want a number for that? Small int. I must be missing something. MySQL, small int. So there's our range from negative 32 to positive 32. But why is it requiring me? I should be able to just put that in a small int. Oh, I just have to omit the parentheses. That's what it is. So when I pick it from the dropdown, it automatically puts it in, but I don't put parentheses in there. Okay, so we've got those. I want to go then to the category. The category, I would say, is going to be varchar, again, because it's kind of variable length. But I have a tighter limit on the category because I know what's going to go in there, right? So if I look at the three categories we have, boots, buckles, and hats, right? So buckles would be 7 characters, right? So I could keep this pretty small and make this varchar 7. Next would be my style. How big does my style need to be? Give me a number.
15.
I would go back to maybe it's the same as our name, right? Maybe it's around 20.
Got it.
Yeah, 20 is a decent starting number if you don't necessarily know how big it needs to be. So that's what I'm going to use for the rest. So style, texture, varchar 20, and size and color. Now size I could probably get down to smaller. But I'm just going to leave it at 20 for now, because that'll be, good enough.
Why would size be a varchar? Why wouldn't it be like an int?
Well, what are my sizes? List them up.
Oh, I must be thinking of something else. I don't know why I thought that.
Yeah. Like, my sizes would be like small, medium, large, right?
Yeah. I don't remember what I was thinking.
So, well, what if you're thinking about belt sizes, right? Belt sizes could be like 32 inches.
That could be what I'm thinking, yeah.
Yeah. So if I'm more general and I allow that to be a string, then I allow either of those things to go in there.
Okay.
Right? Medium, small, or large, or like 32 inches, etc. That way I don't have to create 2 different schemas, right? One or 2 different tables. One that has the sizes of strings and one that's the sizes of integers. Okay. So we've got the columns in there. We do need to look a little bit about these checkpoints. So if you checkboxes, but if you look at the top, it'll kind of give you a little tooltip to show you what it's short for. So PK is short for primary key. Okay. Every table we create has to have a primary key. The primary key is what uniquely identifies that item, that row. Okay. So every item, every row in this table has to have a different key. Okay. So what that means, so that has to be unique, and we need that for looking rows up. Now let's say we have the name, right? Is the name going to be unique? Is it going to be different for every product in our database?
It'll be different, right?
Huh?
So it's going to be different, right?
Okay. Is it going to be? Is it going to be?
Not necessarily. You could have doubles.
I could have doubles, right? So if I have that be my primary key, then I've got maybe a little bit of a problem, right? Because I might have doubles.
Yeah.
Right. So oftentimes when we're creating databases, we will add another arbitrary column. We'll call it the ID, and that will be our primary key. I can drag this up to the top because I generally want my primary key to be up at the top. Okay, so I'm going to uncheck the ones on name and make that my PK. So does that make sense? So I'm going to use this ID as the unique identifier for all the rows.
Yeah.
Okay. So we're going to have that PK checked. None of the other columns are part of the key. So we're not going to check those. The next thing here is not null. We have to say, can this or can this not be null? So by default, all of your columns are allowed to be null. The user's allowed to not put a value in there, right? But for some of these, we may want to require an input, right? So for the primary key, we always have to require an input, and that's why that one was checked by default. As soon as I made it a PK, it says, well, it can't be null because the PK can't be null. What about the name? Is the name required? Do we have to have a name?
Probably. And make it easier.
What would happen if I had a product without a name?
Hat number 07, ID 07.
It would be difficult to find.
Right. It would look like a bug on my UI, right? So I definitely want to have all my I definitely want all my products to have a name, right? Do all my products need to have an image?
Yes.
Not necessarily.
No.
Not necessarily, right? But they probably should, right?
Should and required are very different things.
You're right. You're right, Sheridan. They are. What's the difference between should and required?
Me doing extra work.
Mm-hmm. Well,
That's how I do with my test or with my homework.
Yeah.
I should do it. It's not required.
So you're saying we would like to have it, but we could do something where if they don't have an image, maybe we put a placeholder image there. Right? So in terms of the database schema, which is what we're building up here, there's kind of two ways to think about it. You can either think about it as defining, I need exactly, it has to be this is must be true, or this is kind of what I would like to be true. And I've seen people build their databases in both ways, right? Sometimes people are more loose in their schema and they say, well, I don't have to have it, so I won't make it required, right? So what the thing to understand at this point here is if you make it required, then you cannot insert that row in a partial state into the database, right? So if I make the image required, I can't actually put the product into the database until I have an image. Does that make sense? I have to wait to put the project in. So given that, I'm not going to mark it required because I want to allow you to like put in products and then add their images. Okay, is the price required? Should the price be required?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Price should be required. Why?
Because you should always have a price for something, especially since often the default value for something that doesn't exist is 0, so you could accidentally end up selling things for $0.
Right. So there's an important thing to distinction to make is you sometimes treating undefined as 0 is not a good thing, right? Because if you're defaulting and say, well, if there's no value, then it's 0, right? 0 says it's free. Right. So we could work around that. We could say, well, if it doesn't have a price, you can't buy it. Right. We could say if it doesn't have a price, you can't buy it. But that would be very weird, right? I have this item in my store, but you can't buy it because it doesn't have a price. Right. Or you end up getting it for free because it doesn't have a price. Right. So that would be a very good argument for making that required. What about the quantity? Is the quantity required?
Yes.
I think it would depend, because some stores confirm quantity before sale and some don't.
Right. So some do and some don't. So what if, as I could have kind of two ways I could be doing this. I could be tracking my quantity in the system, or I could be not tracking it. I could be tracking my quantity in some other system, right? So if I have a null value here, what does that mean? Well, that just means I haven't entered a value, right? So if it's null in here, then I don't know what the quantity is. It's not that it's 0, it just means I don't know, right? So you could have a case where null would make sense. You tracking with me? So this doesn't necessarily need to be required. That's really down to like, what are your requirements? You know, what is your actual system? Okay. The category, does everything have to have a category?
Yes.
Why?
You have to know what type of item it is.
Right. Okay. Yes. I need to know where to put it in the store. Right? Do I put it under category X? Is it a boot? Isabel? I need to know where it is. So those, just like the name's very important, I need the category to categorize it. Now, things like the style, the texture, the size, the color, all four of those, right? Those could be null because maybe that particular product doesn't come in, different styles. Or maybe it doesn't come in different textures, or it doesn't come in different sizes. Maybe it's a unisex size and it all comes the same, or could be color. Like my buckles, in theory, right, probably maybe don't have a size. So the rest of those would be allowed to be null. Questions?
No.
Okay. So we've got our basic sort of table here. The next column, and we've defined what's required. The next column to look at is it unique? Okay. Can different products in the store have the same value? Okay. So if I kind of go through these, usually the things that you mark unique is only going to be 1 or 2 columns, if that. So let's start from the top. The ID, we've marked it a primary key. It's already automatically unique. You don't need to mark it as unique. If you've marked it as a PK, you don't need to mark it as unique. It already is. And you shouldn't mark it as unique. On the flip side, what about the name? We were talking about previously, should the name be unique or not?
No.
No. Because you could have doubles on choice.
Okay. So where would that practically happen in my store? Where would I have, give me an example of 2 items that have the same name.
If there was a minor change to an item, you might make a new listing and have the same name.
Okay.
You could have small and large snake boots.
Okay. But, all right.
So
yeah.
So the one entry would be snake boot large, and this would be snake boot small.
Okay. So then those are listed as 2 separate products? Or are those one product?
Yeah.
Okay. So I could do it that way, right? If I'm thinking of those as 2 different listings, then sure. I would say a lot of times you want to make that consideration, because for some systems, it really does make sense for that name to be unique. If I'm talking about, for instance, your login credentials, right? Do I want 2 people to have the same username?
Probably not.
Probably not, right? So things like that, you would want to mark them unique. But yeah, there's cases here where you might want to not have that unique. So let's not mark that unique. Binary, we don't need to worry about. Unsigned, zero fill, auto increment. Yeah. Okay. So one thing I want to do here real quick is I do want this AI box. Can you see that?
Yeah.
On the first row, the ID column, I am going to mark that one as auto increment. Okay. So auto increment says that anytime you put a row into this table, it will automatically figure out the ID. It will automatically figure out that ID for you. It'll just do that starting from 1 and counting up. So that's what auto increment means. It basically automatically assigns an ID to it. If you don't set auto increment, then anytime you insert, you have to say, well, what number is free? Is 5 free? Okay, well, I can insert it as 5. Is 6 free? Okay, I can insert it as 6, right? So that's what we're going to do, here for our primary key. We're also going to mark it as auto increment. Okay, so let's go ahead and hit apply finally. And you can see that this process of setting up a table sometimes takes time, right? It's something you have to think about. Okay, so let's hit apply. And what you'll immediately see is there's some code that comes up here, right? So these tables can either be created using this interface in Workbench, or you can create them using SQL. Okay. The upside of using SQL to create them is then they're easier to, you can save that script and then run it on another computer. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Versus I can take a screenshot of this, but I can't easily duplicate that series of checkboxes on another computer, all that set of settings. So I'm gonna probably want to save that for later. Now I'll get back to it because if I remember right, I can regenerate this later, so I don't need to save it right now. So I'm just going to tell it to apply or to execute that script. Okay. But before I do, let's look briefly at what's there. And it's basically what we kind of defined in the UI. So it says create a table, right? So we're creating a table. We say cowboy boots dot. So cowboy boots is, remember, the name of our schema, right? So we're adding this to the cowboy boots schema, and the name of the table is products. Okay, so that's what that first part is, right? Then inside of here, we have parentheses to start and begin the create table. And in there, we specify all the columns. So you can see, for instance, we're specifying that there's an ID column, that it is type integer, that it is not null, that it can't be null, and that it is auto increment, right? So you see that there. Now you'll notice that I'm not specifying this primary key though in that first row. You see that? So primary key is actually later in the definition. You can see the name, again, the name of the column, varchar, and then whether or not it's null. So if it can't be null, it's not null. If it can be null, you just write null. Cool? Any questions on this syntax so far? Okay. The last thing you'll see after all the columns is you're going to see that it says primary key is ID. So you just have to tell it what the name of your primary key is. So in this case, we've called it ID. Okay. So that's the gist of that. Let's hit apply. Okay, it says execute SQL statements. Hit finish. Now I can go over on the left. You can kind of see I can expand, and there's my products table, right? Yeah, I can see all the columns inside of it. Now, if I right-click on products, you'll see I've got an option to select rows, limit 1,000. Okay, so that's going to go let me look at the data that's there, right? So I've just created the table, and that's kind of defining the structure, right? Defining what we would say the schema. I'm defining how the database is structured, but I haven't put any data in, right? I don't have any rows yet. So what I want to do is add some rows. Okay, so let's say we want to add a row to this table. Okay, now to add the row, I need to actually write some SQL, right? So I need to write a statement to insert data into this table, okay? And the way you do that in SQL is you write out insert, okay? And then you need to tell which table we want to insert into, right? So we want to insert into the products table. And then we need to specify the columns that we want to insert into. So let's say what columns at minimum do we have to give a value to add a product? What columns require a value?
Name, price, and category.
Okay.
And ID.
Okay. So ID requires a value, but that value, remember, is auto-incremented. So it's automatically filled in. So I don't actually need to give it an ID. So the name, you said the name, the which? Name, price.
Price.
Category. Was there anything else that I marked as required? I think that might have been it. Yeah. Yeah. So those are the only ones we have to add. So here we'll say, between the parentheses, we'll say these are the columns that I'm going to fill in. If you don't put in the name of the columns here like this, it's going to assume that you want to insert values for all of the columns, right? But several of these columns are optional, right? We don't have to insert a value for them. So if we don't specify which columns we're doing, then we need to do all.
Hey, Mr. I'm sorry for interrupting. I got lost a little bit with looking at when I was saving my table. I had actually put the wrong name in there. But how did you get into this particular view? I'm sorry. I'm trying to get there.
So I clicked on products and I said select rows, limit 1,000.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, so that's how we got here. The other way I could have gotten in here is I could click on, actually I think I can just click up here, create a new SQL tab for executing queries. So that's the other way you can get here. So I'm going to say select, so insert products. So I need the name of the columns. Okay, so that's that. And then the values, and you say, what values do I want to insert for that? So, yep.
Mr. Smith, if you didn't specify the columns, would it assume you also want to enter the ID, or would that be excluded because it's auto-incremented?
So that's kind of an interesting question. So because it's auto-incremented, it actually depends on how many columns you give it. So if you give it typically, so let's see, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 plus the ID. So if you give it 9 pieces of data, it will assume that you're excluding the ID. If you give it 10 pieces of data, it will assume that you're including the ID.
Okay, that makes sense.
So I find personally that it's usually best to always include the names. And it's a lot easier to troubleshoot your code if you have the names in there. So let's say when I insert a name, insert the product. So let's say we have, baby boots. How much are the baby boots? Somebody give me a number.
$19.99.
Okay, $19.99. Okay, so we're going to insert baby boots. Let's see, we've got a buckle. Okay, so what kind of buckle are we having?
Silver?
Huh?
Did you ask what kind of buckle it was?
Mm-hmm.
Silver?
A server buckle?
Silver.
Oh, silver. Okay, so we've got a silver buckle. And how much is that one, Daniel?
$25.
Okay, so $25 even. All right, and then what about a hat? Maybe a wide brimmed hat for $50. And this is a hat. And maybe I should be plural with all of these. So I said boots, I should probably say buckles, and I should probably say hats. So you can insert values into your database using SQL, and this is how you write that. So it starts with the keyword insert, the name of the table, the name of the columns you want to insert, and then you put in this keyword values. So after values, you can specify here's all the sets of values that I want to insert. Right. So this is a row. This is another row. This is a third row. I can insert an arbitrary number of rows. I could insert just one row, or I could insert up to like 100 at once using this method.
What character is that on line 5?
What character? What?
What character is that on line 5?
On line 5, that's a semicolon.
Okay, it's just a little blurry.
Yes.
Yeah, sorry. I'm sure there's some way to increase the font size here. I'm not sure offhand. But yeah, that's a semicolon. So like most languages, SQL, you kind of end your lines in semicolons, but your semicolons are optional. You don't have to terminate your lines in SQL. But I find that it's usually safer if I do. So you'll see a comma after each row, and then you'll see a semicolon at the end. Okay, so I'm going to run that. I want to make sure I don't have anything selected, because typically it only runs what I have selected. So for instance, if I only had this stuff selected and I hit execute, it's going to say, hey, there's an error here because I can't, your syntax is incorrect, right? So you see it says you have an error in your SQL syntax, right? So make sure that when you're running, you're selecting all the code you want to run. Okay, so if I just run the insert statement by itself, okay, it should tell me something. No database selected. Select the default DB to use the schema. So, okay, I don't have one picked there. There we go. Oh, I have to tell it what database to use, yeah. So it's still telling me here, no database selected, select the default DB, use this to check it. If I right click here, I think there it is, set as default DB. So I can make my Cowboy Boots database as my default database. You see how it's bolded out now?
What did you hit? Because your pop-up didn't show for me.
I would say, let me switch this.
I mean, I could probably just restart the stream. I didn't.
Yeah.
But like when you right-clicked on it, I didn't see the pop-up menu.
I think that's a problem on my end, not your end. There.
Okay, now I can see it, yeah.
Yeah. So you're going to right-click and you're going to say set as default schema. So set as default schema, that should make that bold. So it's going to run against that. Now, there's another way that you can do that. You can tell it which database to run against, and you write use. So if I write use cowboy boots, then it will know that I'm running against the cowboy boots database. So that's the other way to do that. It's just say use the database name. Okay. So I've inserted some data. You'll saw when I actually inserted it, do you see the message down at the bottom where it says 3 rows affected?
Yep.
So we'll tell you how many rows you actually inserted. 3 we would expect. If I were to insert that again, right, that's going to go through a second time. And that's going to go through a second time because we haven't told it that any of those columns are unique, right? So I could keep doing that, yada, yada, yada. I would have a lot of duplicate products if I ran the insert again. Now, let's say I just run the select down here. Okay, so if I just run the select, that will then give me the data that's actually there. So insert lets me add rows, select lets me see the data. Okay. So I can see that there's now 3 rows in the table. Does everybody see that?
Yep.
I've got 3 rows.
Yeah.
Okay. So your insert statement is what we call, kind of your way to create rows. Your select, let's look kind of at the syntax here. So I say select star from cowboy boots.products. Okay. So cowboy boots.products is the name of our table. Okay. So we've got its products is in the cowboy schema, cowboy boot schema. So that's the table I'm pulling from. And then what we have here in the middle between select and from is the columns that I want to get back. Okay. So if I say star, I say I want to get all of the columns, right? I want to get all of the columns in the order that they are normally in the database. Now, what if I only want some of these columns, right? So maybe I just want the name and the price. Okay. So I can specify that this way. Cool. So you see I've got kind of a table that just has those 2 columns.
Yeah.
Okay. So I can use my insert statements to insert data, and I can use my select statements to look at data. And it kind of creates a view, right? Creates another table. Anytime I run select, it creates another table that is kind of the output of that. Now, oftentimes I want to do a few things with that data. One of those things that I'll want to do with my results, I'll probably want to order them, right? I might want to say, let's order them by their price. Let's order them from the most expensive down to the least expensive. So I could say order by, or you might say sort, but this keyword here has to be order by. And you can tell it what column to sort it by. So I'm going to say order by price. Now, by default, it sorts it in ascending order. So it would be from the lowest price down to the highest price. And I think I accidentally executed the whole thing because now I have duplicate products. So let me go ahead and comment this out. There's 2 ways to comment out SQL. You can either comment out a single line with a dash dash, or you can comment out a whole block with the // whether you're familiar, same sort of syntax as CSS and C++. I mean C#. So you can put in that to comment that out. All right, so I'm going to say order by price, execute. So you can kind of see how it's ordering from the lowest price up to the highest price. If I flip that around, I can say order by price DSC, short for descending. or you put ASC there for ascending. So in descending order would be the highest price down to the lowest price. Okay, so oftentimes that's one thing you'll want to do with your select queries is order the results. If you don't order the results, they may come back to you in a random order. The order's not, there's no promise on the order if you don't order them. They may start out potentially like the order that they're in the table, but that's not guaranteed. So you usually want to include some sort of order by clause. Another common thing we usually want to do is we want to filter out the data, or we want to say I only want certain products, right? So let's say I just want this silver buckle. The way to add that in is you add what we call a where clause. So we have the basic version of this, right? Without an order by, without a where. That's all valid SQL. I can add in an order by, or I could also add in a where. And these are I can combine these. I could have an order by and a where. But here I'm just going to add the where. So where the name is equal to silver buckle. Hit save. So if I say where name is equal to silver buckle, I'm just getting that product with that name. Now, does anybody notice anything weird about how I wrote that where clause? Maybe you're not used to. Said name equals silver buckle.
No double equal.
No double equal, right? So remember in JavaScript and in C#, if I just have a single equal, what does that do?
It assigns.
It's assignment, right? And it's always assignment, right? Is it everything other than assignment? It's not, right? Well, in the world of SQL, it's actually sometimes assignment and sometimes equality, actually. Depends on what syntax you're in. But when we're in a where clause, it's always actually comparison. So that's where you'll see just single equals in there, not double equals. Okay. So that's a kind of a basic start to getting Workbench and using Workbench, adding in some data. Any questions so far?
Nope.
So I think it's good. I think it's probably a good time to call this done for the day and let you move on to some lab work and playing around with this yourself. So as far as labs go for today and tomorrow, because remember tomorrow is a lab day. I think I already downloaded this. Throw that up. So the labs for this database stuff I'm going to kind of put out in piece by piece, so that there's not you don't have a whole bunch all at once. So the first kind of assignment that I'd like you to do is actually go through first. I put up a reading assignment on Perusal called Database Theory. If you would read through that, discuss it, and then go over to Code Academy. Code Academy's got a really good a good start for your getting into SQL, a SQL tutorial. That's what I'd like you to do for your labs today and tomorrow. And then we'll come back and we'll have the kind of second part of the lecture on Wednesday. Questions?
Are we in class tomorrow?
Yeah, we're on campus tomorrow. Yeah, tomorrow we're on campus. So we'll just have a lab day on campus tomorrow.
So we're not starting on the actual lab yet, right?
Yeah, we're not doing any Node stuff yet.
Okay, so just Code Academy and read the document.
Right, yeah. So I have some labs for Node, but I want to make sure that you have all the kind of some experience with the SQL and the database stuff before we jump into like, okay, how do I connect this to Node? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So that's where I want you to start for just today and tomorrow. I think the Code Academy lab will probably take you a little bit to get through.
Oh, so are we starting on the labs tomorrow then? Or not until Wednesday?
What do you mean?
Like you said, today and tomorrow for like getting used to it.
Getting nodes, going through Learn SQL. This is what I want you to do today and tomorrow. That's your lab assignment.
Gotcha.
Assignment. So you've got a reading assignment on Perusal, and then you've got that hands-on assignment there.